So, man, you've recorded with, I mean, so many people that, I wanted to steer people to your website, which is georgefludas.com, to find out all the artists and, the great people that you performed and recorded with. And you have sections up there where they can see different people that you've recorded with, and then also toured with and shared the stage with. But what I want to kind of do is talk about just a few different artists that you performed with. And the first person that I want to talk about is your relationship with, I think, someone that's a mentor to you, and that would be Von Freeman. And can you tell us a little bit about how you met Von and your entryway into your working relationship with him?
Yeah. I met Von because a friend of mine who I was going to school with at the time at Roosevelt University in Chicago, a bass player named John Weber, he was playing with Von. He had been playing with Von off and on for a couple years, actually, before going to college. He was like 16 years old when he started playing with Von. And when John introduced me to Von, the way I met Von was I went down to the gig one night. And that's the funny thing to think of now. It's like Von had a couple steadies on the south side of Chicago, 75th Street. And there was a gig that he had at a place called the New Apartment Lounge. And then there was another one at a place called the Pumpkin Room, which, as you can imagine, was a lot of pumpkin color, vinyl seats and walls. It was very orange in that place.
Right.
And actually, I think that was the first time that I saw Von and got to meet him and got to sit in and play, because John was playing that gig. And, Von was always very encouraging and welcoming to young musicians. So he asked me to come up and play. And of course, I was pretty nervous. I was, I think, like 18 years old or something. What's interesting is that you could get into a bar at that age, at that time,
Right.
I don't know if they were serious about carding. I guess it depended on where it was, but yeah, from that point on, I made a point of going to see Von as much as possible when he was playing at clubs on the north side, like the Green Mill or Andy's, or going down to the Tuesday night session on 75th Street. And like I said, he was so encouraging to young musicians, and he had such a positive vibe that you really, it made you feel like you wanted to, be a part of that,
right,
and keep coming back, because not everyone who's of the older generation at that time was positive and welcoming and warm and fuzzy and smiling,
right,
joking around like Von was. But Von was very serious, of course, about the music. But over the years, I ended up getting to play with him more and more, like in his quartet, in band situations. He had a regular band that would make most of his gigs. He had like a couple different stables of musicians that he would use, but he had a regular band, all good friends of mine who played with him at the Apartment Lounge. But over the years, I used to play often with Von with a rhythm section that I played with frequently. It was a pianist named Ron Perillo and bass player Dennis Carroll. So it seemed like Von, he knew that we had our thing and he liked it. Mm-hmm. So once in a while, he would hire us as a trio. And I think, different thing, we were much younger than a lot of the guys that he used to play with. But yeah, man, I mean, I learned so much from just being around Von and listening to his sound and his, way of building a solo, understanding how to, that's like real time lessons,
Right.
And at first I was probably like way too bombastic and, you're 20 years old, you think you know how to play everything,
Right.
So he would say little things to me, like, take your time, baby. We ain't in a hurry, stuff like that,
Right.
And those are the things that it's just all you need to hear is that. And if you're smart and you're sensitive about the music, you make an adjustment. It doesn't take a whole lot of doesn't take a whole lot of words just to know, like, sometimes all it takes is a look, and like you're too loud, or you're not bringing enough, either not loud enough or not intense enough, or whatever it might be. But all of that stuff, see, it's like there were several musicians who were much older than me that I wanted to learn from them. And it was intuitive. It wasn't like somebody told me, this is who you should learn from.
Right.
The first time I saw Vaughn play and heard his sound in person, it was like, man, this is it. This is the top shelf stuff right here.
Right.
So then, of course, like I wanted to develop my playing enough to be able to play with someone like him. But it also seemed almost like a stretch at the very beginning, because I thought, I'm just this like little young white kid, and this is like a milieu, these cats, it's this, the cultural thing is so, you know what I mean? I mean, even just like North Side, South Side, and there was definitely Chicago segregated, as you know, you lived here. And there was kind of like almost like this, I hate to say it was an understanding, but everybody knew what was up, the black musicians knew, like, North Side, that's a clique, white musicians often tend to congregate together, they have their scene, there's favoritism that goes on, and they knew what was up, and conversely, the white musicians who really wanted to be a part of the black scene may have been a little, like, had some trepidation about it, because a lot of times the black cats aren't opening up as quickly to you. Right. It's almost like you have to have a vetting process, go through a vetting process. It's not just going to be like all warm and fuzzy right from the start. But that was the unique thing about Vaughn. Vaughn didn't play any kind of, games that way either. He was very open and very encouraging, and really it was beautiful. And I think that's why his legacy ended up, he became an NEA jazz master, I think shortly before he passed, and he got the recognition that he really deserved. But in hindsight, I realized that Vaughn was like a real maestro mentor type personality.
Let's talk about another legend that you performed with, your stint with Betty Carter. And
oh yeah, that was short. That was so short.
It was short, but it was informative though.
This one. Oh yeah, I think working with Betty, I had tremendous respect for her and a little bit of fear, because she was extremely direct and pretty regal. I mean, she's a queen. She's like a queen. She really commanded respect, and she was so just outspoken. Like and if you were on stage with her and you just lapsed even in the slightest, like I remember one of the songs we were playing was an intro, and then when I came in, I did this little setup, and it's the most typical setup that a drummer can do. When you come in, like leading into the song or leading into the next section or whatever.
Yeah.
You go boom, like that, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
on the snare drum or across stick or whatever.
So 1, 2, 3, boom.
Right. 1, 2, 3, and 4, boom, boom.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And she just wheeled around so fast, and we were in a sound check, I think it was, at the club, like a rehearsal sound. And she goes, no. She says, I don't need that. She says, come up with something different. She said, everybody in the world plays that tidit boom, tidit boom. She says, I don't need that shit. Give me something, And when someone tells you something that directly, your first impression is like, oh damn, like, oh, I feel, oh, I'm crushed, right? But that really stuck with me. That really stuck with me. It's like, she's right. Like, there's so many other options for making an entrance on the instrument, and you don't, like, that's a default. It's almost like a no-brain default.
No question. Right. Yeah.
So it was, there were a couple other, little instances like that where she was talking about playing on the cymbals during a ballad instead of sweeping and playing hi-hat all the time on 2 and 4. Like, she's like, use the colors of your palette. You don't have to keep this thing happening, and Ira Sullivan also once told me that. He said, people aren't necessarily dancing to the music anymore. You don't have to keep that rigid 2 and 4.
Wow.
He said, people are listening to what you're doing. You're painting. Wow. He said, so he's like, paint me some stuff, man.
Man.
And so I know this is a tangent, but then you got, I was playing a gig with Frank West, a great saxophone player, and we were playing some tune. I don't remember what tune it was. And apparently my hi-hat wasn't in there enough for him, because he just turned around and looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just went like this. He went. And his expression was just so flat,
Oh man.
And I was like, okay, he wants hi-hat on 2 and 4.
Right.
So he didn't want all that painterly stuff going on.
Isn't that's the,
he wanted this,
Yeah. And those are the things that you have to learn by playing with with every artist may want something.
Right. You
different.
Read the situation, you listen, you read by listening, and enough experience will tell you, well, this cat's from an older generation or maybe swing era,
Yeah, let's talk. So let's go to another just icon that you've worked with, and that would be Ray Brown, because you did a lot of work with Ray. He's sort of the
we could do those for the pay-per-view.
We could do that. Right. We do the Patreon. We have to get a Patreon and put those together. But talk a little bit about your time with working with Ray.
Well, that was just one of the most incredible experiences, for me. Is like a dream come true playing with Ray Brown, because as you know, as a drummer, to play with a bass player with a groove is a groove and a sound like that is just, it's a dream come true. That's it. When I got the call to play with Ray, actually the first time I got called to audition for his band was in 1998. And my wife was about to have our first son. That was in summer of 98. And Greg Hutchinson was leaving the band, and he asked me if I would be interested in doing the gig. And, I was like, man, I would love to do the gig. But the problem was that the dates that I would be, starting to take over for Greg would be right at the time when my son was due to be born. And I didn't want to miss that. I didn't want to start out going on the road immediately, like when I would probably miss the birth of my first son and that whole first year. That's such an important time. So I respectfully declined, the gig. And 2 years later, almost 2 years later to the week, Ray was back in Chicago. That was summer of 2000, and my wife was pregnant with our second son. So
Wow.
he was due in October, and this time the dates, the drummer was Kareem Riggins, and he was leaving the band, and it was the same thing. He called me up, this is pre-cell phone days, called me up and said, "Hey, I'm in town with Ray." And I said, "Yeah, I know, I'm going to come down and hear you cats." And he said, "So I'm leaving the band, and the gig yours, if you want it, you just got to come down, and I know everything will be, I know Ray will love you," and blah, blah, blah. And so I had to make a quick decision, like, am I going to do this again and turn down playing with Ray Brown? So that time I did not. Also, it was less of an issue because my son was due in October and the gigs were starting in like August. So I spoke to Ray about it and I told him what was going on. And I said, I'd just like to have that time off in October around his due date, maybe have that month off. And he was fine with that. So I think that actually the trio had dates booked in Brazil, which I missed those dates. And I think Kareem came back just to do those. But from that point, it was summer of 2000 until basically 2002, the end of 2001, I worked with Ray. I mean, Ray was such a dominant kind of, personality, whether it was on the bass in the band or off stage, his humor and his personality was just big, big personality, really funny. And Ray had a side to him that's very challenging, and I don't mean like difficult. I mean, like he liked to challenge people, whether it was in a conversation or musically speaking on the bandstand. He kind of liked to see you wiggle a little bit, see you writhe. He wanted things to be swinging as hard as possible right from the start. So it really felt like when you were on stage with Ray, it's time to really bring your A game, like every bar. And he could sense when things would be slipping. Actually, Betty Carter was like that, I thought, too, for the brief time that I played with her. Actually, all the greats are like that, but they show it different ways. But you can intuit when you're not, when it's, you're not right in sync in terms of intensity and feeling. Because I never played with a bass player who had so much of a commanding sound and feel as Ray, to that point. I mean, I still haven't, but it was something about the way he pulled the strings, the percussiveness of his beat that was so driving. It was like I felt often like, man, he doesn't need a drummer.
Right.
The way he plays the beat, it's enough for the band. There's like this edge, this attack in the beat, but then there's this big sound, and then like the best notes, like Ray Brown's note choices. It just doesn't get any better. And it was. I used to love sitting so close to him and hearing every single note that he played. Like a lot of times when you're set up on stage in a trio or in any, group setting like that, quartet, quintet, the bass is to the drummer's right. And then the piano is, so the bass is in the middle. Right. That's the typical setup. So the ride cymbal is near the bass player, but with that setup, the bass faces away from the drums. The bass faces toward the piano, So it's not often that you really get the sound from the finger on the string, the percussiveness, when you're sitting in the drum chair. But the way Ray set up was the opposite. The drums were on the right side if you're on stage looking at the audience. The drums are on the right. bass is right next to the hi-hat, and then the piano is in front of and to the left of the bass.
Okay.
Okay, so that means that Ray, as leader, is in this command center. He's like right in the middle. So the bass is facing me more, and it's much closer. It's like, right, just 3 feet to my left. 2 feet away from my hi-hat is the bass. So I can see his fingers, and I can hear the natural sound of the instrument in addition to the amp.
Wow.
Which, what better place to be if you're playing with someone like Ray Brown? You know what I mean? It was like, I'm hearing everything he's playing. And he can look down, and he often did, say, get hot. All right, let's go. So, and the moment you lapsed on something, you start to drift away, or you go, hey, like he can tell if your mind is wandering, or, all right now, Porgy. He can call me Georgie Porgy, or he'd say little things like that, and it was like, so the communication thing is so much better when you're set up that way. And that's the way Oscar Peterson's set up. That's the way Ahmad Jamal's set up. That's the way Monty Alexander sets up. And that's my preferred setup for a trio. Actually, that's my preferred setup, period. Because then the bass can see the piano's left hand, the whole keyboard. And the piano player can do things like what Monty would do is, if he wanted a specific bass note, let's say, or a groove, he would just give a signal, and 2 meant go into 2. 2 could also mean 2 hits, where you go pop, pop. So he go like that, 1 is just 1 hit.
Right. Well, since you're there, let's talk.
Locking the 4/4. Yeah. And he's right there, and he would just throw these little hand signals up, or he put his finger on the bass note he wanted just before he wanted it played. So let's say he wants to go to a key change to A flat. We'd be in the middle of a groove. Then he just moves his pinky over to the A flat and does a little like this. And the bass player knows, now we're going to boom, 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 move to A flat. Or you're playing a ballad, let's say. Incredible. And on a ballad, changing the harmony, doing some substitutions, he could play the substitutions and be obvious about where the bass notes he wanted were next. The bass player can see he's looking right down on the keyboard. So that was one of those things that obviously Monty played with Ray a lot over the years. Ray was sort of like a musical father to him, just like Dizzy was. And those cats came from that same school. So,
And you worked with Monty for a minute, right? Like
off and on, about 10 years. Yeah. Off and on. Monty also likes to use different rhythm sections. He might use different drummer for a tour, and then use a different bass player for another tour. So, I was playing with him often from about 2002, which is the year after Ray Brown, the year Ray died, actually. Ray passed away in summer of 2002. And I had left his trio the winter before.
Okay.
But I had some personal, family stuff going on that I kind of needed to be more available for. And Ray, that was one of the things working with Ray, was he stayed really busy. So it was a lot of time away, on the road.
Right.
Ray was real old school that way. He did not like being home. He liked to be out on the road. For a while there, he was making good money playing studio sessions in Los Angeles, and he had a production business, basically management business, I guess, with Quincy Jones. They had an office on Sunset Strip together.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I don't know if you noticed, I did that Sanford and Son video.
Yeah.
And I never knew that until I was looking for some photos to post with the video, and there's a photo of the 45, and the 45 says, I don't remember the record label right now, but it says the name of the song is a Street Beater, Street Beater, and then it says Quincy Jones, composer, arranger, and it says producer Ray Brown.
Man, did not know that.
And that's that era. That's 73.
Wow.
So Ray told me that they had an office together, and they each had their like stable of artists that they were producing. Quincy had his, Ray had his. Sometimes Ray would, Sarah Vaughan. Ray also managed the modern jazz quartet for a while. So Ray had his hands in some other things in the 70s when he left, after he left New York, and I think he was living in New York up till maybe the late 60s or something. I'm not really sure when he settled in California, because I know he'd been in California for quite a while. But, that was the lifestyle there. Record dates, movies.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever see the movie In Cold Blood, the movie about the murders that happened in Kansas, the Truman Capote story In Cold Blood.
Oh yeah,
Quincy Jones did the soundtrack to that, and that's Ray Brown all over that soundtrack.
Oh, nice.
Like a lot of the background music, a lot of the background parts are just like bass,
Incredible.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. A&M Records, right.
It was on A&M, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he was busy at that time, but he was getting bored because he wasn't swinging real hard.
Right.
He was doing a lot of this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so he finally had the notion to get back playing jazz with Milt Jackson, and he and Milt were good, very good friends, and so they started booking gigs and playing together, and then he started to do his own trio thing with Gene Harris and Mickey Roker. So that was really the start of the Ray Brown Trio, late 70s.
Incredible, man. Wow. Well, if you guys want to learn more about artists that George has performed, because there's a bunch more, please go to his website, which is georgefludas.com. Follow him on Instagram, which is George Fludas also. And you can learn, more about all the things that he's done and what he's currently also up to.